Okay, so the last shita we saw in terms of the authorship of Iyov was it never happened. Right? And we talked about why you would say that, the weirdness of the Satan double daring God and things like that. Fine. So we were up to 2 lines from the bottom of Tet Vav Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yochanan avi Rabbi Elazar Jamri Chavayu Iyov me'olei Golahaya. He returned from the Galut. Uveit Midrasho b'Tveria. And he had a base medrash in Tveria. What? Yes. So the Gemara says, Meitvei, is that true? You make Shodav She'iyov Misha Shenech Yisrael Mitzrayim V'ad Sheyatzu. Right? Doesn't it say that the length of his life was from when the Jews went into Mitzrayim until they came out? He says, no, Ema Kim Misha Shenech Yisrael Mitzrayim V'ad Sheyatzu. It just meant he lived for a long time, for 210 years, but not that he was in Mitzrayim. So don't worry. Okay. What do you think is behind the Shita that he came back from the Gola? What is behind it? Because note, that is one of the few that doesn't have a pasuk, which means that it must be a logical argument. So what's the logical argument to say that he's from the people who come back from the Gola? What do you think? What? So again, it's hard to figure out exactly why they would want it. My guess, as we've seen,
If he lived, like where it says, doesn't mean he lived 210/400 years according to that.
Sure, however many years you think it is, fine. Rashi assumes here 210, but yeah.
I mean, he was like, does that mean he was probably alive during the Korban or no? Or was it extended?
Yeah, so I don't know, but I think Ezra's on the right track. Meaning, I think.
The only thing I've got as a potential is that it's saying these aren't like natural events that happen; these are like caused by the illness.
Okay, look. So it's possible. Yeah, it's possible that he's saying that maybe these happen because of Galut. But I think Ezra might be on the right track. That part of it is that what's going on here, the Churban and Shivat Zion is a time when we know that the Jews are really, really asking about Schar V'Onesh. Right? They're really asking that, right? You think about it. At the beginning of the Churban, everyone's asking, right? This is like what all the Nevi'im are saying, is there is Schar V'Onesh, and yet it doesn't look that way. Because when are things the best? Yeah, under Menashe, under the bad kings. And when are things bad? Under the good kings that inherit the bad times from their fathers. So Chizkiyahu inherits it from Achaz, right? And things like that. And then they go into Galut, and they're constantly struggling with, is this fair? So one thing they're struggling with is theodicy. Right? The second thing is, what are the people who come back from Galut struggling with? As is clear in Yeshayahu, meaning much earlier, but Yeshayahu already anticipates it. And what does Yeshayahu say? What are they going to be struggling with? Whether or not they still have a relationship with God. Right? Yeshayahu famously in Perek Nun says, you think you're divorced from God, but where's your get? Right? Meaning you're still obligated. No matter how bad things get, right, you still have a relationship with God. So those two questions, why do bad things happen? And the question of even after bad things happen, does that mean that we're in a relationship with God and He's punishing us, or that God has given up on us and this is the end of the relationship? That speaks very much to this, because remember, what's the drama of Iyov? It's not just theodicy, which is why do bad things happen. It's more specific. It's, right, what does Iyov's wife challenge him to do? Curse God. I mean, curse God. It's not just about questioning God. It's, does this suffering make you want to give up on your relationship with God and challenge your relationship with God? Right? And that struggle is what the Jews are experiencing. So my guess is that that's what this is getting at. Now, it could be, Yotam, I brought the book for you.
Sure.
You're coming back?
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. So the other possibility is maybe what Yosef is saying is maybe there's this belief that like the exilic period is worse. Like God, it's a period of Hester Panim, so bad things happen in the world in a way they don't when God is revealed in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. Maybe that's also related. Oh, correct. I mean, I think it's a related factor. Now, it's interesting that he says it's at the time of Shivat Zion rather than the Churban, but it could mean, as Ezra notes, that whole period, meaning the good and the bad, basically that whole, it's also possible that it's focusing on Shivat Zion, because that's when the Jews start to rebuild their relationship with God post the trauma and the questions of theodicy, which is the ending drama of Iyov. Right? So it's possible that that's also part of it. Okay. So then the Gemara says, Meitvei, Shiva Nevi'im Nitnabul Umod HaOlam, Ve'elu Hein, Bil'am Ve'aviv, right? There were 7 non-Jewish or non-Jewish prophets or prophets of the non-Jews. Bilam and his father, Iyov, Eliphaz HaTimni, Ubildad HaShuchi, V'Tzofar HaNaamati, Ve'elihu ben Barkiel HaBuzi. Who are those people? This is really not a trick question. I mean, it is a trick question only because I know you don't know the answer, but it's really not a trick question. Yeah, Bilam, his father, and Iyov, I know you know. Who are the other 4? No, wrong. Eliphaz HaTimni, Bildad HaShuchi, Tzofar HaNaamati, Ve'elihu ben Barkiel are the 4 people who are respondents to Iyov in the book. So basically, this is 3 people plus 4 in the book of Iyov. It's not that Eliphaz, it's the 3 friends of Iyov and then the 4th not friend who also critiques him, which is Elihu. Do you know the book of Iyov at all? In the book of Iyov, it's Iyov suffers, gets into fights with God, blah, 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 blah. His 3 friends go through rounds of debating with him, and then at the end, out of nowhere, someone who seems not to have been a friend of Iyov is just tired of it, Elihu ben Barkel, and he just comes in and starts yelling at Iyov, you, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. No one even bothers responding to him, and then God comes out of the whirlwind, right? So that's basically the book of Iyov. It's a very weird book.
I think that's essentially something.
Because so their names are Eliphaz HaTimni, Bildad HaShuchi, Tzofar HaNaamati, and Elihu ben Barkiel HaBuzi. So that means that 4 of them are from Iyov. So the Gemara says, don't you see that he's not Jewish? Now, why is that important? Because it sounds like if you think that it's about Shivat Zion, the only reason it would make sense for him to be put in Shivat Zion if he's Jewish and therefore experience whatever the experiences are of Galut and Shivat Zion. So, doesn't this show you he's a non-Jew, which would tell you that his history can't be based on Jewish history, right? That's essentially the argument going on here. Said, really? What about Elihu? Elihu seems to be Jewish. So he says, no, he was Jewish. No, maybe he really is not Jewish. He just was a prophet to the non-Jews. Now, if that's the case, what about Yonah? Yeah, so I don't know. Right? According to this line of the Gemara, I have no idea. I mean, what happened to Yonah? I don't know. I don't know. Fine. She says, but aren't there other Nevi'im that talk to the nations of the world? Presumably Yonah is still there. It says, Hatam Ikar Nevi'ata li Yisrael, Hacha Ikar Nevi'ata l'Olam. He said those other ones, their main prophecy was still to Jews, even if they had prophecies to non-Jews, but these 7 were primarily to non-Jews. You'll ask me about Yonah, maybe he had other prophecies. He does appear elsewhere in Tanakh, not just there.
Yeah, he does appear.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe we just didn't record his Nevuot. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Meitvei Chasid Hayab Umod HaOlam said, okay, but elsewhere it says he is a non-Jew. He's a righteous non-Jew. V'Iyov Shemo V'lo ba le'olam el kadei lekabel scharo. And he only came to this world to get reward. Hevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu olav Yisurin. God punished him, brought suffering for him. Hitchil mecharef megadef. He started cursing God. Kefal HaKadosh Baruch Hu scharo bal mazeh kadei letardo min ha'olam. And then God doubled his reward to make him, yes, not get Olam Haba. Now this is a very negative view of Iyov, right? So until now, all these views assumed that whatever you held of Iyov, he was probably good by the end, right? This one the theology of Iyov that he captures in, right? Most people read Iyov as follows. Iyov, tzaddik. Satan double dares God, suffers. His friends say, you must be evil. He says, no, I'm really not evil. And then God says, no, Iyov's really not evil. Iyov finally says, you know what, I'm done being angry at God. I do tshuva, it's all great. That's how most people read the book of Iyov. This Shita says, no, this is how the book goes. Iyov challenges God. His friends say you're a terrible person. God says, you're wrong, he wasn't a terrible person, but he did challenge God, so you know what, you're right, he's a terrible person. Now, I'm going to end his suffering, but only so that I can destroy him in the world to come. That's a little bit of a weird read of the book of Iyov. It's a little bit of a weird read. But the Gemara says that seems to be this Shita. So you see that in its question of authorship and Iyov, it also gets into what is the theology in the day of the book. So the Gemara says, Tanoihi, it's a machloket. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Iyov, b'mei shvot ha-shoftim. There are yet other Shitot. Iyov was in the time of the Shoftim. Haya shneimar, hein atem kulchem chazitem, v'lama ze hevel tehebalu. He said to them, why are you all saying hevel? Right? Narishkeit, vanity. And then it says, Ezehu dor shakulo hevel, heve omer doro shoshvot hashoftim. The generation which complete vanity was the Shoftim. Now, I'm going to guess that at some level, this line is more about interpretation on the book of Shoftim than it is on Iyov. I don't know, right? That really the whole point of this is that the time of the period of the Shoftim was terrible, but presumably there is a certain level here of intertextual interpretation between them. What that is, I don't know. Meaning, look, in a sense, Shoftim, the book of Shoftim is about the cycle of reward, punishment, reward, punishment, reward, punishment. So, in that sense, maybe what it's saying is, look, in Shoftim, there is a very clear schar va'onesh cycle, but it doesn't help. The fact that it's very clear doesn't help anyone do good. So Iyov, who's like challenging theodicy, challenging the notion that there's a very clear reward-punishment schema in the world, right? In a sense, it's sort of inverse of Shoftim, right? Meaning his life is completely inscrutable, as opposed to their life, which is scrutable. That's a word, right? But they're opposites in the sense that they never learn their lesson. So maybe that's what it's getting at. Right, meaning maybe it's like, look, in the end of the day, even when reward and punishment is clear, people still abandon God, and therefore, at some level, it's hard, right? Predictability doesn't necessarily help, right? So maybe that's part of it. I'm not sure. I assume it's something like that. Okay, Rabbi Shua ben Karach Omer, Iyov bimei Achashverosh haya. Yeah, so the actual proof here is beyond weird, which is Shene'emar v'lo nimtza nashim yafot kibnot Iyov b'chol haaretz. Ezu dorshem b'shu nod nashim yafot heve omer zedoro shel Achashverosh. The entire interpretive move here is it says that Achashverosh's daughters, that Iyov's daughters were really beautiful. What is the generation in which we most care about beautiful women? Achashverosh, where the entire story is about what? What did you say? She did it? Okay. And the answer is Achashverosh. Yes?
Isn't that like the same time as Shivat Zion?
Good. So Ezra points out, isn't that basically more or less the time of Shivat Zion? So this is a huge machloket, because Chazal think, this is one of the major machloket about Purim. Chazal think that when did Purim happen? Before Shivat Zion, meaning during the years of Galut, the 70 years. The Pshat, as Ibn Ezra notes, is that when did Purim happen? After. The question being, are the Jews here waiting to go back to Eretz Yisrael, or are they the Jews that refused to heed the call to go back to Yerushalayim and chose to assimilate, and that's why Purim happens. It's a very, very important question, but Chazal are presumably working in their chronology in which Purim happens in the time of the Galut. Even if this Shita holds his time of Shivat Zion, that would only bolster the notion that this is less a chronological machlokes as a thematic machlokes, right? Good. Why? So it could just be, you always have to be open to the possibility that there's nothing more to the Agadata than meets the eye, which is, it's about beautiful women. Yay. It's possible. In a sense, obviously, I think comparing it to Purim makes different sense in the sense that Purim and the story of Achashverosh is like the paradigmatic, God is hidden, and therefore things at first glance don't make any sense. Now there, in the end of the day, we see God's hand in it, but, it is the holiday that represents God being hidden, and God being hidden, remember, half of Iyov is about why are bad things happening, and part of it is God really, right, is that questioning the relationship of God in a world of Hester Panim. In that sense, that is very plausible. So comparing it to Achashverosh, in that sense, maybe picking up on that theme. I don't know. I'll be honest that as much as I would like to go in that thematic direction, the Gemara itself supports the much more literal direction, which is that the reason that they thought it was in the time of Achashverosh is because of the beautiful women. Because the next line is, Ve'ema b'mei David, tichtiv v'yavakshu na'ara yafa. If it's just about beautiful women, it might as well be in the time of David, because not only Achashverosh looked for the most beautiful women around, so did David. When he was freezing cold, all he wanted was a beautiful woman to cuddle him. Right? That's actually how Shmuel Bet starts. That's how Malachim Aleph starts. Right? Which is shocking. People barely realize that, right? Yes, Malachim Aleph starts off that David is freezing, so they look for the most beautiful woman they can find to cuddle him. Yeah. All the things we don't... What?
That was weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's weird in it. Yeah. Right now I'm doing Avshalom with Meir. There's a lot in that book. It's really hard to teach a 7-year-old, okay? I thought David Bathsheba was bad, and then I'm like, oh wait, no, Amnon and Tamar, that's that's really hard. Right, really, incest, brothers raping sisters, that's not an easy story to teach a 7-year-old, okay? It's just... I'm not really... I don't know. Now we're at Avshalom, okay. Which... the beginning is he rebelled. When he then rapes all his father's concubines, there's a lot going on in this book that's really hard to deal with. Yeah.
Did David marry her or no? So in conclusion, David wasn't shomer Iyov.
It's not totally clear what happened there. It's an interesting story. Okay. Fine. So then he says, but wait a second, if it's just... Now, I'll be honest, though, that since the Gemara does seem to play on this specifically, it does really sound like the main issue for this Agadata is the fact that beautiful women are involved in the story. So either it's just a textual thing, or maybe I'm missing something, and the fact that Iyov's daughters are beautiful is more central to this story. I don't know, I guess that's another possibility, which is maybe that sort of the beauty, the search for just beauty, and the vanity that it and the capriciousness that it implies, maybe that is central to Iyov, but that's problematic, because we're not guessing that Iyov was a tzaddik. Iyov, the book, tells you that Iyov is perfect. So to say that this is the Gemara hinting at maybe Iyov is much more superficial, maybe. Maybe, right? Maybe he's superficial in that sense, right? Meaning he was a tzaddik, but in the end of the day, he was only, right, skin deep, as it were, right? Meaning he was in it when things were good, and that's exactly the Satan's claim. I don't know. It's also possible, right, that the Jews' loyalty in Chazal's... actually, I have another idea. Maybe, right, in Chazal's idea, because the Jews found God when it was hard, that's when they re-accepted the Torah. right? That's like the Chazal version of it, right? Kimu v'kiblu, kimu mashi kiblu kfar. So maybe that's part of it also, right? That it's about that reacceptance that comes with Purim, right? I don't know, though in Iyov it's a little bit weird, because Iyov really does, God reveals himself. Unlike in Purim, he comes out of the whirlwind. So I don't know. Okay, so he says, Hatem b'chol gvul Yisrael hacha b'chol haaretz. David only looked for all beautiful Jewish women, but Achashverosh looked for all beautiful women everywhere. Thank you. Great. Okay, I don't know. Rabbi Natan Omer Iyov b'mei malchut shva haya. Shne'emar v'tevel shva v'tikoche. Okay, someone tell me what the heck happened there. It is the time of the Queen of Sheba. Now that is weird on many levels. Why is that weird? So first of all, it's weird because what should it have said if it wanted to say the time of Malchut Shva? Yeah, thank you. It should have said Shlomo. It's sort of weird for the Gemara to identify the time of by Malchut Shva. So what does that indicate?
Something about...
Good. Something about Malchut Shva. Very good. What about Malchut Shva? The Queen of Sheba. What? What?
No, maybe it's a time that non-Jews are living.
Very good. So if I remember correctly, I heard this on a Leap Tag many years ago, that this pshat, I think it's compelling, is what Yosef said, is that the Chiddush of Iyov is that, as the Gemara said before, it's a book towards the non-Jews. And here you have a tzaddik who, in pshat, is not Jewish, right, but represents all that is good in this world. Malchut Shva is that moment, right? And we've talked about this before, but Shlomo HaMelech becomes the paradigm in Tanakh for what? Mashiach, right? Whenever the Pesukim describe Mashiach, the Messianic era, it often invokes images from Shlomo, the wealth, the peace, right? That was true in the time of Shlomo. But one of the keys to the Messianic vision is, like Yeshayahu says, that all nations will come to Yerushalayim. The one moment in Tanakh where you really see that played out before the Messianic period is Malchut Shva's visit to Shlomo, where she says, "Aha! I see that you are wise. I see," right? And that moment captures the imagination that there are legends, so many legends built off that story. The most important story that comes out of it, I have no idea whether it's true or not, but it's very important, which is, what is the most important story? I won't call it a legend because then I'm assuming it's not true, but the story that comes out of it.
Think of a couple too many.
Is that Shlomo married her, and they had a son, and his name was Menlik. You're like, why is this important to me? Because the Ethiopian Jews claim to be descendants of Menlik. Yes, like they trace themselves back to Menlik, right? To Malchut Shva. So, right, the imagery of Malchut Shva is actually like a messianic image when non-Jews embrace the vision of Torah. And to have Iyov, who is described with the same terminology as Avram Avinu, but he's, according to most Shittot, not Jewish. When saying it's Malchut Shva, what is it really saying? There was a time in history in which godliness was so universal that you could find an Iyov, just like you could find a Malchut Shva amongst the nations of the world. So my guess is that this Shita is playing on that. Right? Not per se the fact that there's suffering and things like that, because what suffering is there at Malchut Shva? The world is peaceful. But rather the notion that no. It's about him being a non-Jew who reaches perfection. Right? And that sort of proto-messianic imagery comes from that moment when Malchut Shva comes to see the wisdom represented by Shlomo in Yerushalayim. Good, very good, Yosef. I think that's right. V'chachamim omrim Iyov b'mei kazdimaya shneimar Kazdim Zamu Shlosha Rashim. So it's in times of the Kazdim. So Rashi clarifies that means the times of Nebuchadnezzar. I tend to think that that's probably another way of saying, right? We talked before about it being Shivat Zion, so maybe that's the whole process, right, of rebuilding. This, I think, places it very much at, that's when things are being destroyed, people are questioning God, time of Nebuchadnezzar, right? That seems to make sense. V'yesh omrim Iyov b'mei Yaakov haya, v'dina bat Yaakov nasa. Now this is a fascinating shita. It's in time of Yaakov, and Iyov marries Dina. Wow, is that an interesting shot? Where does he get that? It's a Russia. It's a Shava from Nivala. Why would you say this? Why in God's name would you say this? You could, maybe. So I don't know. Meaning, it. So I think there's an interesting look. The Iyov, the Dina story is, at least part of it, is a story of the bad that happens among non-Jews and a failed attempt to convert. Right? Meaning Shimon and Levi basically pretend that they want to spread the word to the nations, right? Bring them close. It's the opposite of Malchut Shva, right? Because they pretend that they want to spread the message of Bnei Yaakov, and then they kill everybody, right? But to have Iyov marry Dina is to say, look, that was failed, but there is a potential successful vision. Even though the Gemara is about to say, oh, he's Jewish, but I don't know how he's Jewish because he's not from Yaakov's family. Fine. Someone not from Yaakov's family, not from the originally Jewish, to join the family, right? So he could be working on that line. It's also true that the Dina story is, another one of these stories where good people are suffering. So it's always possible that that's what's going on, right? That, look, Dina suffered and she was a good person, and so did Iyov. So it's possible it's picking up on that. Match made in hell. Yeah, exactly. Right. Fine. And then he says, "V'kulu tani svirlu d'Iyov miYisrael have." All these shittot hold he was Jewish, even though I don't know what Jewish means here, because a lot of it is pre-Jewish, and he's not from Yaakov's family, so I'm not really sure what all those shittot mean. Levar miYesh omrim, except for the Yesh omrim, the Isa Gadai Muhammad Olam Ave Bater the Shachiv Moshe Mishar Yeshchin Olav Dichavim, because the problem is that after Moshe had davened that no non-Jew should ever be a prophet, and therefore, if he's before Moshe, then he can be not Jewish, but afterwards he can't. Because V'ha'amar Mar Bikesh Moshe Shlo Tishra Shchina Olav Dichavim V'natan Lo Shnem Flin Ani V'yamecha. Okay, and then the Gemara gets into talking about the generation of Iyov, of how bad it was. But let's read through it quickly. If we have time, we'll get back to it. But I do want to look at the Yerushalmi before we do it. But let's just see what he says. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Doro Shel Iyov Shatuf B'Zima Haya. The generation of Iyov was very immoral. Shene'emar henatem kulchem chazitem v'lama ze hevel ta'abalu, because he accused them of hevel. Ktiv shuvi shuvi hashulamit shuvi shuvi v'nech zebach. Okay, fine. Ema b'nevua tichsev chazon yishoen amatim kol adam zev hevel ta'abalu lamali amar b'yocham mai tichsev ema shodav shiftim. Okay, fine. I don't know. Okay. Now there are yet other shita. There's one very famous shita that doesn't make it into the Bavli, and that is, before we look at the Yerushalmi, but there's probably one very famous shita that you know of, that Iyov is from when? The Gemara already mentioned it, but it actually rejected it. Right? The Gemara said, isn't he from the time of Mitzrayim? And then it said, no, it means he lived as long as Mitzrayim. But what does the Midrash say? Yeah, very good. The Midrash that he's one of the 3 advisors of Paro. Then when Paro said, what do I do with the Jews? Yitro said, don't do anything to them, be good to them. So he kicked him out, and Yitro ended up being family of Moshe Rabbeinu. Bilam said, enslave them, so he was punished by being killed eventually. And Iyov was silent, and therefore God said, you were silent when you shouldn't have been, I'm going to make you scream. Now presumably that midrash, what is the point of that midrash? What drives that midrashically? Yeah, very good. Is that midrash is denying what Iyov itself says. That midrash cannot believe that the real answer to the story is God tortured Iyov because the Satan double dared him. Right? That midrash is saying, I don't believe it. God doesn't give in to dares. There must be more to the story, and is giving you a backstory. Right? Meaning, yes, that is clearly what that midrash wants from my life. 100%. Yaakov is 100% right. Okay, let's look at the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi adds a few more positions. So let's just, I copied it for you here. This is the last one in the 5th parak of Sota. Eimatahai Iyov. When was Iyov? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish b'shem ber kapara b'meim Avram Avinu. Haya hadei dechdev isha haya be'eretz Utz Iyov shmo. He was in the time of Avraham. Now, that actually makes a lot of sense, not just because of Utz, but because he sounds like Avraham. He's Yashar V'tam, he follows God, right? The interesting thing is, that means that this midrash is positing the notion that Avram isn't alone in the world.
Not necessarily the best.
Or, yeah, he's not even the best, right? He's not necessarily, and I will point out that this might actually be connected to another set of midrashim. Which set of midrashim? The set of midrashim that read the same double dare into Akedat Yitzchak. Remember those midrashim? Why did Akedat Yitzchak happen? So one of the midrashic traditions is what? Because Yishmael said to Yitzchak, I'm better than you because I was willing to go through my bris milah. Right? When I was 13 and you didn't even know what was happening to you. And Yitzchak said, I'd give you my life. Oh, dare! Right? Also, what do other midrashim do? They read Iyov into Avram. Why? Because, according to certain midrashim, the Satan keeps trying to stop him along the way. Right? Telling him, God didn't really mean it. What are you doing? God promised you, right? So the God, and other famous midrashim, what does the Satan do? He turns into a river to stop him, right? So the Satan stops him. And yet a third midrashic tradition that may be connected to this is the Satan used the information to kill Sarah. Right? Which means that Avram does a good thing, and the Satan uses the shock to kill Sarah, and what does Avram do? Nothing. He doesn't challenge God. Right? So it could be that this isn't just saying, oh yeah. Right? It could be it's connecting to all those midrashic traditions that Avram was also challenged by the Satan and things happened unfair. But unlike Iyov, who says, why is this happening? Avram, even though the Akedah is totally unfair, and his wife dying is totally unfair, and the Satan tries to stop him, unlike Iyov, who ends up getting angry and etc., Avram doesn't. So it could be contrasting it, which is saying, look, there's a successful version, Avram, an unsuccessful version, and Yitzchak, and an unsuccessful version, which is Iyov. So it could be that this midrashic tradition is connecting to those. Rabbi Abba Amar Bimei Avinu Yaakov Haya V'Dina Hayta V'Ishto Hada Dichtiv Kedarach Hanivalot Dabri. Point 2, which we saw in the Bavli in the time of Yaakov, but he married Dina. Uchtiv Ki Nivalas Ab Yisrael. Rabbi Levi Amar B'Shvei Shvatim Haya, which we saw already. Right, we said, is it about the Shvatim? Is it about Yosef, the unfairness of Yosef, all of that, etc. Rabbi Yossi ben Chalaf to Amar, and this is the midrash I mentioned. Biridatan lemitzrayim haya uvaliyatan meit. It was the time of right. Remember, this is what the Bavli rejected as pshat in that midrash. Right, the Bavli said, "Didn't you say he lived the entire time they were in Mitzrayim?" And he said, "No, it means he lived 210 years." But the Yerushalmi says, "No, it means he lived from when they went down to Egypt and he died when they left." Mashal Roesh Sheba Ze'ev and his Davig Litzono Now, but then it gives a very weird mashal. What is the mashal? A wolf came and then he was attached to the tzon. So ma'asa ha'emid tayash echad kignegdo. This is a very weird tradition, right? Basically, how do you save sheep? From a wolf? You give them other prey to chase. So this tradition says, yes, the Jews were suffering, and how did God convince the Satan basically to let go of the Jews and save the Jews from Mitzrayim? He distracted him by tormenting Iyov to distract Satan. Yaakov is like, that is the weirdest thing. Yes. Yeah, I honestly have no idea what that midrashic line, I don't know what that argument, I mean, sure, that sounds as capricious as Iyov actually sounds, which is, I dare you. And God, this is making it more complicated, which is, God tricked the Satan into daring him to distract him from the Jewish people, right? That's basically the argument that this midrash says, right? That, don't think that right? I mean, this midrash, I think, is trying to solve the problem, which is, how can God get goaded into a dare? What's the answer of this midrash? God tricked the Satan into daring him to distract him. It's like not blowing the shofar in every Rosh Hashanah. I don't know why it works, right? But it works, right? I don't know.
But isn't...
I don't know what to tell you.
Logically, how does it even line up? Doesn't Iyov suffering happen?
I don't know. No, maybe he suffers towards the end. I don't know. Or in the middle. I don't know. I have no idea what this wants from me. I mean, I understand what it's doing. I think that the main point of this midrashic tradition is to explain, how did God give into a dare? The answer is, he didn't. He tricked the Satan into daring him. Right? I think that's what this midrash wants. I don't know if it makes it better. I honestly have no idea. The next one is the one that you know. Tani Rabbi Shmuel, Iyov me avdi paray hayo umigdole pamal yishalo hayahi dichtev hayare dvar Hashem v'gomer uchtev be'ish tam v'yashar elkim v'sar meira. He's actually one of the officers of Paro, and I assume this is connected to the other midrashic tradition. Now, it's possible that these are connected, meaning it makes as much sense as this makes theologically. It makes more sense that God tricked Iyov into the Satan into daring him if Iyov really did deserve it, because of the whole story in the Midrash that he stayed silent when the Jews suffered, right? All of that together may be a very elaborate midrashic way of explaining the bizarre theology of Iyov. Maybe. I don't know if it makes it better, but I guess I sort of know where it might want to come from. I don't know. Woo! Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Hudam, Rabbi Meishvot HaShoftim Haya Time of Shoftim Haydi Dechtiv Enatem Kulchem Chadim Alam Zet Tevel Tabalu Chazitem Aisedori. The only thing it adds here is basically that he looks around and says, look how bad everybody else is. Right? So the Yerushalmi seems to add a line that isn't the Bavli, which is that why would it be in the time of Shoftim? Because that would be what convinces Iyov that it's unfair. Right? Meaning, maybe Iyov isn't perfect, but Iyov says, God, look at everybody else. They're terrible. Why are you doing this to me and not them? Right? That seems to be the Yerushalmi's version of it happened to be made Shoftim. Because what did they do? Etc. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Malchut Shvaya, Shnemar, Batibol Shvavati Gochem. Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Kazdim Haya, Shnemar Kazdim Zamush Losha Rashim. Rabbi Shua ben Karchom Bishmei Achashverosh Haya Shnemar V'Akshula Melech Narod B'Tilot Avot Mareh Uchnev Lo Nimtza Nashim Yafod Kivenot Iyov L'Fum Chen Rabbi Yochanan Lamad Mimenu Hilchot Avel. No, sorry, I skipped the line. Rabbi Shua ben Levi Amri Ole Gola Haya. He was from the Ole Gola. Rabbi Yochanan Amri Ole Gola Haya V'Yisrael Haya. And now the Yerushalmi in a very weird moment says, aha, why does it matter whether he was Jewish or not? whether or not you can use Iyov to teach you Hilchot Avel. This is when things get very weird in the Gemara sometimes, which is, if he's Jewish, then what we learn from Iyov will teach you how to properly be mitabel. And that's how we learn that you're supposed to do Kriya, standing up. Now, I don't know which came first. Is it that once they think he's Jewish, they learn Hilchot Avel, or they were looking for a halachic place of Avel, so they decided midrashically that he was Jewish, so he could be a source? I have no idea. But what you see here is that the line between midrash and halacha, between agadah and halacha, is not always as fine as we would like it to be, right? Because this complicated question of who is Iyov apparently impacts the question of whether you can learn Hilchot Avelos from him. Tani Rabbi Chia. I had one good tzaddik in the world. I gave him all of his schar in the world, and then I got rid of him, which we saw in the Bavli already. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer Iyov lo haya v'lo atzid lichiyot. I honestly have no idea what this line means. Right? Yes, I know exactly. I don't know. Right? In the Bavli, this version is it was a mashal, it never happened. In the Yerushalmi, it never happened, nor will it ever happen.
Does that mean that there'll never be a person named Iyov?
That will go through this. So I don't know. I mean, I assume it means the same as the Bavli, that it's a mashal, but I don't know why exactly he says it'll never happen, unless it's like nothing like this could ever happen because it's crazy. Maybe that's what he's getting at. I don't know, but it's a very weird formulation.
There's no way he's saying that unless he's making a theological claim.
I assume it must be a theological claim, which this could never be. God doesn't get double dared. I assume, yes. He says different things. One place he says it's an Avram, one says it never happened. Ella hu haya v'yisurin lo hayu. So then he says next possibility is he did exist, but it's fiction about a real person named Iyov, which honestly I don't know what compels anyone to do that, unless Iyov was like a tzaddik person who suffered, and then we tell a backstory about it to I don't know. So why was it written alav? The answer for the Gemara itself is, if it was come to tell you how much of a tzaddik he was, right? It's basically, imagine that this would happen, he would have stood up to it. It never happened, but he would have stood up to it. And that's, the entire point of this book is to tell you that Iyov really was a tzaddik, and therefore would have been able to handle really bad things. And then it continues by telling you, Darash Rabbi Kiva v'charaf Elihu ben Barkiel abuzim eshbachad ram Elihu ze Bil'am ben Barkiel. Unlike our Gemara, which said, isn't Elihu maybe Jewish? The Yerushalmi has a totally different position from Rabbi Kiva, which is no, Elihu is Bilam. Sheba lekalel et Yisrael uberechan. Now this is even weirder because it means that one of the people who's standing up for God ends up being the one who curses the Jews, which may just show you that, indignantly standing up for God, that God is just, but not caring that by doing that you're making someone feel really bad because he's been through a lot. That doesn't lead to healthy religiosity. So, you might believe in God, but you're going to end up cursing the Jews because...
or it's pointing out that...
Or it's pointing out Bilam and Iyov are contemporaries, right? I don't know.
But that would also make you say that Bilam at the end of the day has a very
from theology, which is twisted.
Which is really weird.
No, I think that is what it's saying. It's that Elihu sounds really from because he says, how can you question God? You must be a Rasha. And the answer is, yeah, that's the type of person that has no compassion, and his frumkeit ends up being corrupted religious zealotry. Right? So I do think that is what it's getting at. In who kfar kisa alav hamakom and later lekechimcha el Elihu ze Yitzchak ben Barkiel ben sheber choel. But Rabbi Elazar says that's crazy. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says this is the guy who stood up for God the most in the whole book, right? No, he is a tzaddik who God blessed. So The second Shita says that's crazy. No one that. So this might be an interesting machlokas, which is, can someone be like really, really from min adam lamakom and have no compassion on people who are suffering? Elazar ben Azariah says, yeah, meaning he's really from, and like he has no compassion on Iyov because Iyov is challenging God, but he really is authentically from. Right? And Rabbi Akiva is saying, no. If someone can turn to someone suffering whose kids just died and said, you shake it, which is basically what he does, that guy might believe in God, right? He might even be a Navi, but like, there's something fakrumt, as they would say about it, right? There's something wrong. That religiosity has something severely lacking in it. And that's the type of person who end up cursing the Jews. I think it's actually a very profound machlokas, which is, can you basically be, standing up for God, but not having compassion on human beings? Right? Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay. So I do think that this, 13-way machlokas about the authorship of Iyov is a really interesting way to see the way the Chazal midrashically work and how they can contextualize different books of Tanakh and conceptualize it and deal with really complex things and share theological ideas between books and stories. Good. So we'll stop there. And you did like a whole Amud in Bava Basra and a whole Amud in Sota Yerushalmi for it. So.